With me today I have Ulrich Merten, Bob Riley, Jim Cruver, and Dave Furakawa, all of whom were involved in the very early days of membrane technology, specifically reverse osmosis. Where had they got to in the development of the asymmetric CA membrane by then?
Well, they had a membrane which gave, there's Charlie Reed had done this work on cellulose acetate.
Right.
He's the guy that sort of showed that cellulose acetate was a promising material. They cast membranes from that by a technique which ended up giving much higher flow rates than Charlie was able to get. And but that's about where they were. They had a membrane that worked. They put it in small cells, and they were starting to try to build something bigger, like a plate and frame arrangement.
Right.
And when we looked at it, we were impressed with what they were doing, but we identified, I guess, three main things which we really wanted to look at. One was there was no real explanation why these membranes were better, why they gave the high flow rates with selectivity. Secondly, their stuff always sort of decayed with time. That wasn't quite understood. And finally, this plate and frame arrangement looked a little clumsy. So we worked on all three of those problems. And first showed that it was a thin film thing which worked and made these membranes do what they did. Second, we sort of invented concentration polarization, which hadn't really been recognized before, that you really have to mix the water. And then finally, of course, came up with the spiral wound module as a way of packaging membranes more efficiently.
And how did the concept of the spiral wound membrane develop? Who came up with the idea? I mean, were you eating a jelly roll one day and said, boy, this is a good idea? Or?
Well, I don't think any of us can tell you, because the guy that originally had that idea was Jules Westmoreland. And where he got it, I don't know.
They couldn't get water through, and he brought his wife's nylons in, and that material became the first try at a permeate carrier. But I actually got started in ultrafiltration rather than reverse osmosis. Mm-hmm. Even though we tried to make a really good seawater membrane, which was, at that time, the most sought-after membrane was something that would desalinate seawater. At that time, there wasn't much money in selling seawater membranes. So we actually developed an ultrafiltration membrane to separate proteins from cheese whey. And we use that effectively also for separating enzymes from mother liquor, which we could do with our tubular system because it is open channel and you could clean it easily. And we did reasonably well with it. One of the applications I was most proud of was using cheese whey protein and putting it into a fruit drink in South America to combat protein deficiency in those countries. And that work was done by Coca-Cola Export Corporation. And I think we had about 6 fair-sized plants operating in South America for that purpose.
When you started with the membrane development, obviously using flat sheet and cells, and then you developed the spiral concept, what drove the selection of 4 inches, the size you should make?
What was 4 inches?
Or was it something you could fit in a 4-inch pipe?
If you're talking about the outside diameter
yeah,
of the module, I'll bet it had more to do with the size of pipe which is available than anything else.
Yeah,
I mean, one of the great things about the spiral system is that you can use an ordinary piece of pipe as your pressure vessel.
Right.
And so whatever you had. But of course, the thing about the first concept of the spiral module is that when you wrap this sheet around and around, pretty soon you get to the point where the pressure drop on the side where you're collecting the water is too high. The water has to flow through the spacer and get all the way to the central pipe. So that's why, I mean, the first spiral wound module was a single wrap, and this most important modification was, one, realize that you can put multiple wraps in there, and then perhaps equally important, that you can devise a way to make all those wraps from one length of a membrane sandwich,
right.
wrapping it up, folding them as you go. Then you have something which you can manufacture, which has a high membrane density and fits in a round pipe.
As you look back and you've seen what's happened in the RO business since you were at ROGA, has it fulfilled your expectations or exceeded them, or do you think we could have done more?
Well, I think it's done pretty well. When we started it, the nuclear industry was at the peak of enthusiasm, and what we foresaw was an infinite supply of almost costless energy. And the question really was, what are you going to do with all this stuff? And I think what sort of got us interested in things like reverse osmosis was to go out and irrigate the deserts. And I don't think we've quite got to that point yet.
Towards the end of the fluid systems business, did that decline because there was less enthusiasm for being in the systems business, or was it because you couldn't compete with some of the smaller guys who were starting to emerge and compete?
I think it was mainly because we found ourselves competing with our own
With
customers.
your customers, yeah.
And that's really why the decision was made
Yeah.
to get out of the systems business.
Was it difficult to make a 12-inch element?
Well, it's more
Scale up-
it
scale
is more
up?
difficult
Yeah.
to make them to high yield. It was at that time. I think it's improved quite a bit in the last few years with automation and all. But yes, it was more difficult. And then also we never got the running experience at Yuma on those 12-inch elements because the plant never was in full
Never really
operation.
operated, right.
So never really knew how well they,
And will it ever?
and will it ever, yeah.
I remember those days in reverse osmosis, you had to spend half of your talk on explaining what reverse osmosis was before you get into the details
That's right.
of why yours was better.
Trying to solve some of the problems that still exist with membranes that were here 20 or 30 years ago. Membrane biofouling, for example.
Yep.
Still with us. So many people are working on it. Tony Fain at Singapore Membrane Technology Center and Gary Amy at KAUST, as well as our center. We're all working around on this problem of membrane biofouling, as well as the Dutch group Wetsis and many others, for that matter.
Yep.
There are probably more funds are being expended on solving that membrane biofouling problem than any other aspect around the globe. So it's a nice mix of things that we're working on, and it's been a pleasure. And the Aussies, indeed, have been a pleasure to work with.
Good. Good. Well, Ulrich, it's as the gentleman who wrote the first proposal to the Office of Saline Water to develop the spiral wound membrane, it's been a privilege to meet you. And I thank you for coming here today. Bob, as always. Jim, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Even though you are a traitor to the cause and went to the UV side.
Not
Can we call that the dark side? And Dave, as always, and I know you didn't fly back from Australia specifically for this, but I know if we'd asked you, you would have. So, thanks very much, guys. I really
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks again.
Thank you.